Good evening. Turkey Red, Chapter 4, The Cloud. Martha, I want you to go with Jacob and pick blackberries down by the creek, Mama said a day or so later, scurrying around in the kitchen with buckets and pans. Ach, Mama, it's so hot. I don't see... It will be cooler under the trees. I must have the berries while they are dark and sweet to make into jam and jelly. Think of the good thick spread you can put on fresh home-baked bread next winter. Or the blackberry wine we can drink by the fireside, Jake added with a sly wink. Eee, Jacob, you are thinking wicked again, Mama chided. God will not bless us if we are drunk with wine. Jake looked at Martha and shook his head helplessly. She knew what he was thinking. God isn't blessing us now, either, even if we act holy and pious and never take a drink at all. He'd said it so many times. Yes, Mama, he muttered with a patient sigh. Sweat beaded his forehead and ran in trickles down his red face, and Martha watched him anxiously. Jake was her dear brother, her only brother. Yet, lately, he sometimes acted like a stranger. He had never wanted to leave Russia and the comfortable village life. And now he was like a calf tied up in the pen, trying to break loose. The air lay hot and still like a thick band around the world. Brown sparrows chirped listlessly in the brush along the fence rows. Martha grabbed her kerchief from its nail behind the door and tied it under her chin. She followed Jake out of the house, carrying a tin pail in each hand. She watched as Jake flung the battered saddle on to Prince's back, for they were to ride the old horse to Cottonwood Creek, a mile away. Prince clopped slowly down the pasture path and made his way tiredly toward the creek. Black clouds smudged the horizon and pressed down firmly on the prairie. Even the thick shade along the creek seemed to smother them as they reached the water. Where the creek backed up around a triangle of logs and moss-shouldered rocks, the water formed a quiet little pool. Water striders skated back and forth on the still water, and sunlight made warm freckles of light everywhere, slanting down through a tangle of elms and cottonwoods. Martha began to pick the luscious black fruit from the prickly bramble near the creek as Jake tied Prince to a cottonwood tree. She plopped the ripened, most purplish berries into her mouth and watched the juice stain her rough brown fingers. A restlessness gripped her as she glanced sideways at her brother. Jake was silent as he plunked plump berries into his pail. His chin jutted out stubbornly, and he pressed his lips into a firm gray line. Something was bothering him. She wished she knew what it was. Dratted thorns, Jake growled, sticking his thumb into his mouth. Jake, you said a bad word. You know Papa wouldn't. No, Papa wouldn't like it, because Papa thinks all Mennonites are Christians, and that's his only way is right. Here we are, tearing our fingers in order to scrape together a few measly berries so Mama could cook jam. Well, at Pat's while we had bees and honey and fruit trees. We had plenty to eat. We didn't have to squeeze our food from stone-hard prairies and thorny bushes. But God let us. God! Jake flung out the word bitterly. Sometimes I don't even believe in God. Why did he lead us here? Papa and Mama have always been right and taught us to believe in God. Maybe they know about him more than we think. Look, Martha, they're a pair of wonderful people. Don't get me wrong. But they have been so carried away about being Mennonite that they won't let us become what we want or do what we want to do. They'll never change. Either we do as we wish or out. If God showed he was more powerful than the Mennonites, would you believe then? Martha asked in a tight voice. He spread out his purple-stained hands. Depends. Ach, Jake, I'm sorry you feel this way. I thought maybe. The words died in her throat, for a nameless fear gripped her. The bank of gray clouds had suddenly boiled up into a greenish-gray mass, and the air had grown stagnant and breathless. Birds stopped their aimless twittering as the greenish clouds whipped themselves into a bowl that grew long and twisted and black. Martha's hands froze on her bucket as she watched in horror. Jake, we'd better run for shelter. Instantly, Jake dropped his pail. And grabbed her hand. Together, they raced for the dry stream bed nearby. He flung her down on the ground and threw himself beside her. What is it? Martha whispered. Jake's jaw muscles worked back and forth. I think it's a storm. A tornado cloud. The goblet-shaped cloud touched the far end of the horizon, poised for a moment, swayed dizzily, then moved steadily across the open prairie. Now it grew restless and charged over the fields with a maddening roar. The whole world cowered silently, except for the center of that great black bowl that moved swiftly across the face of the earth, sweeping everything into its maw. Once the stem stretched and pulled away from the bowl, but it did not break. Then it moved wildly, crazily toward the ditch, reaching out toward the two of them. Martha clung to Jake's neck, closed her eyes, and waited in terror. God was speaking in the cloud, but she couldn't understand him. Jake swallowed hard, but he didn't say a word. At last the glass shattered, and the bowl broke slowly, splintering into small pieces and fell apart. Then it rolled itself in thick gray-black smoke over the fields. She stole a glance at her brother. His face was stony and hard as ever. He hadn't seen God in the storm as she had. Or maybe he hadn't wanted to. He grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet. Together they ran to pick up the buckets. He whistled for Prince, who trotted up behind them, wild-eyed. Soon it would rain. They must hurry home. Uprooted trees were everywhere, and the tall prairie grass lay flattened. Martha felt sad, not because of the storm, but something about Jake was very wrong. She knew what it was, but she was even more frightened than she was when she had seen the rattlesnake. She wanted Jake to be full of laughter and funny stories, and comfort the way he used to be. But he was stern and quiet. The cloud had come with fury, and then it slipped away, leaving only upturned trees and flattened grass. But Martha's heart was still feeling heavy, as though the cloud were still there. Chapter 5. Where is Jake? Several days later, Martha tumbled out of bed in the loft and crept downstairs. Mama sat quietly at the large homemade table, her elbows propped up and tears in her gray eyes. There was no sign of Papa or Jake. "What's the matter, Mama?" Martha asked, troubled by her mother's sorrowful face. Mama drummed her work-worn fingers idly on the oilcloth. "Martha, this morning your brother Jake is gone. He left a note." Martha drew back sharply. So Jake had done what he said he would do? Somehow she wasn't surprised. She knew someday it would happen. Picking up the folded, ruled scrap of tablet paper, which lay on the table, she read in Jake's faltering German script, "I am going away. I do not like the dangers, the hard work, the loneliness, and never having enough money. Perhaps someday, after I've made it good, I will come back. Don't wait for me. Jacob." Martha folded the paper and laid it on the table again. "Jacob told me he was going to run away. I thought he was only joking." Tears stung her eyes. "Joking?" Mama gasped. "But why didn't you tell us? We had no idea." "Tell you what?" Martha blurted out. "You didn't believe me about the Indian and the rattlesnake. I didn't think you would believe me about Jake." Mama shook her wispy-haired head stonily. This country's all so new and there's so much to learn. We didn't know Jacob felt this way, or that he was serious about the way he did feel. But we will pray. Our dear Heavenly Father will bring Jacob back to us. We must believe that." Martha was silent. She had heard too much of Jake's grumbling to believe that it would happen soon. Papa needed Jake to help in the fields. It would be hard for him to be patient. And Mama was always fluttering over Jake like a mother hen with baby chicks. To Martha, Jake was a friend, a wise older brother who liked to tease and tell stories. But since the tornado, Jake hadn't been the same. She would miss him most of all. A few days later, Martha awoke with a hot, feverish feeling in her head. A dry, hacking cough tore at her throat, and she lolled listlessly in bed. A rash of red spots peppered her neck, spreading slowly over her body. She began to feel miserable. Mama hovered over her, bathing her hot face with cool water from the well. "Martha, Martha, where did you pick up this case of measles? No one in church has come down with it." Somehow, somewhere, a faint memory stirred in Martha's mind. A plump, sticky little boy with heat rash? Or could it have been measles? Offering her a piece of hard rock candy. Alice Tinsley's brother, Willis. She tried to tell Mama now, but it was so hard to talk. The words stuck in her throat, and she couldn't get them out. The hot wind blew through the open windows and scorched her flaming cheeks. Her lips grew dry and chapped, and she moaned because she felt so miserable. She wished suddenly for Jake. Jake, who could tell her funny stories and make her laugh. Who would tell her she looked as though someone had splattered red paint all over her. But Jake was gone. And Jake wouldn't come back for a long, long time. Jake, I want you. I need you, Jake. she cried, trying to raise herself on one elbow. Where are you, Jake? Come here. The cloud, it's coming. God is bigger than the cloud. Mama pushed her gently back and placed a cool cloth on her forehead. Martha, Martha, she soothed. Lie back and don't worry. Jake would come if he could. If he knew you were sick and needed him, God will bring Jake back someday. But now, you were right, Jake, about the dangers, Martha mumbled. The snakes and the Indians. She closed her eyes wearily. It was all so dark and hot and weird, like the cloud, and she felt awful. She pushed away the tin cup of cool water Mama had drawn from the well. She wanted only to shut everything out, to forget the wild prairies with their terrors, and remember, as Jake did, the lovely, fruitful life they had left behind. The wide, sunlit valleys, the clusters of grapes in the vineyards, the lush pastures. But she knew it was gone forever. Would Jake ever return?